Out of all the wines in the world, champagne with its fizz and pop is the most iconic. From roaring New Year's Eve parties to Formula One drivers' celebrations, it is the drink of success. In this short course on champagne, we're going to introduce you to this wine's history, the area of Champagne, how this wine is made, and the different styles of champagne you can offer your guests. One important fact to start with. To be a champagne, a wine needs to do more than simply fizz. It must also come from Champagne in the north of France. Only sparkling wine made here can be called champagne. Champagne is a place first and a wine second. To learn more about the place, the wine, and find out where all of these bubbles come from, in this lesson we're going to learn about the history of champagne. The Romans were the first to plant vineyards in Champagne way back in 57 BC. Fast forward almost 1,000 years to 987 AD, and the wines of Champagne were being served to French royalty. But these wines were nothing like the fizzy and frothy champagnes we know today. These historical champagne wines were pale and red wines with no bubbles at all. Fast forward again to the early 1600s, where there was a bitter rivalry between the still red wines of Champagne and the red wines of Burgundy, another wine region further south. Each region wanted their wines to be the first choice of the king, as it would guarantee lots of sales. It frustrated the people of Champagne, the Champenois, that the wines of Burgundy were always richer and fuller flavored. Being more southerly, Burgundy received more sun, letting them grow riper grapes and produce richer wines. This cold weather gave the Champenois bigger problems than just thin, pale wines. But it would be a problem that would turn their fortunes around. Each year, as the new wines of Champagne fermented after harvest, winter would arrive and temperatures would drop so low that fermentation stopped. Winemakers back then did not understand yeasts, sugars, and fermentation, so they simply bottled the wines, thinking fermentation was complete. As the temperatures rose in the spring, the dormant yeasts would wake up and fermentation would begin again. Because the wines had been bottled, the carbon dioxide created by the fermentation had nowhere to go. So when drinkers tasted these wines, they found them fizzy. And back then in France, winemakers and drinkers hated these bubbles. They thought to compete with Burgundy, their wines had to be still. One of the most famous winemakers in Champagne was Dom Pérignon. He made wine here during the 1600s and spent 15 years of his life trying to make sure his wines had no bubbles. He never could completely get rid of them, but his efforts were not wasted. Much of what he did to try and get rid of the bubbles forms part of how we make wine today. You could say Mr. Pérignon was the father of modern winemaking. Funnily, Moet et Chandon, a major champagne house, have named their most expensive champagne after him. It was the English who first enjoyed and wanted more of these fizzy wines. While the Champenois were happy to sell them to the English, they still didn't quite know how the bubbles were being created. They called these fizzy wines le vin du diable, the devil's wine, as the corks would pop or the bottles explode from all the gas. But the fashion caught on, and by the 1700s, demand for this new type of wine was growing quickly. Because the bubbles could not yet be controlled and many bottles exploded or didn't have any bubbles at all, only small amounts of this fashionable wine were produced, and it became a drink for the royal or rich. During this time, a popular food pairing with champagne was discovered that's just as popular today. In this painting, The Oyster Luncheon from 1735, we can see French gentlemen enjoying the delicious pairing of oysters and champagne after a day of hunting. It was only in the 1800s that secondary fermentation was understood by the champenois, and the modern method of producing champagne was developed. We'll learn about this method in a later lesson. These discoveries, along with the invention of stronger glass drivers. Champagne is firmly part of popular culture. In the last lesson, we learnt about the history of champagne and the story of the wine as it changed from a pale red wine into the fizzy drink we know today. In this lesson, we're going to learn more about the geography of the region, what sort of climate it has, and the varieties grown here. We'll focus on an overview of the Champagne wine region, the terroir of Champagne, and the grape varieties. Let's begin with an overview of the Champagne wine region. The Champagne region is found in the northeast of France, just east of Paris. It is spread across 320 villages and consists of 5 main wine sub-regions. Its 3 commercial centers are Épernay, Ailly, and Reims, the wine capital. Around these main centers, the region is divided into 5 main sub-regions. These are, moving from north to south, the Montagne de Reims, the Vallée de la Marne, the Côte des Blancs, the Côte de Sézanne, Aube, or the Côte des Bars. This is the region of Champagne, the northernmost of all the major wine-growing regions. Let's understand more about how this affects the wines of the region by understanding more about the terroir of Champagne. The French concept of terroir refers to the total natural environment of any grape-growing area. The result of such an idea is that a wine should be able to taste of the place it is from. Champagne's terroir is made up of a unique combination of climate, soil, slope, and grape varieties. Being so far north means that Champagne experiences cold average temperatures. The vines are planted at the very margins of their cold tolerance, where the average temperature is around 11 degrees centigrade. It is only because of its precise location and climate that Champagne can produce any grapes at all. Warm airs that drift in from the west coast of France help to warm Champagne's chilly climate and prevent vine-damaging frost. The balance between these warm airs and cold temperatures create a terroir that yields grapes with levels of sugar and acidity that gives Champagne its characteristic freshness and vibrancy. Champagne experiences a good amount of sunlight during summer and nearly ideal rainfall all year round. The regular rainfall gives the wine its perfect balance of tartness and sweetness, while the sunlight adds to the richness in flavor. The most unique characteristic about Champagne, and vital to the wines it produces, is the region's infertile chalky limestone subsoil. This fine and porous soil allows the roots to grow deep into the ground, where they can reach water reserves. It also provides excellent soil drainage, which prevents waterlogging and dilution of the grape's flavors. More than this, the chalk base helps regulate temperature, absorbing heat during the day and slowly releasing it during the night, keeping the vines nice and snug. The limestone in the soil accounts for the deep earthy tones in the wines, especially those from Côte des Blancs and Aube or the Côte des Bars. In areas such as Montagne de Rez and Vallée de la Marne, where the subsoil contains clay, the wines yield fuller, richer and fruitier flavors. The sloping landscapes also play a large role in the terroir of Champagne. The region has so many vineyards in slopes, its wine was once known as vin de coteau, wine of the slopes. Planting vines on the right slopes allows for maximum exposure to sunlight, vital in this chilly region. While Champagne has an overall terroir, even the slightest variations in the soil, slope and temperature can result in a difference in grape characteristics. This means that even two neighboring vineyards can produce markedly different wines. Now let us consider the grape varieties grown in the various sub-regions. Despite being quintessentially light and white, Champagne is mostly made from black grapes. The three grapes that dominate the Champagne vineyards are the red grapes Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and the white grape Chardonnay. Pinot Noir provides the basic structure and depth of fruit in many blends, as well as the distinctive aromas of red berries. Pinot Noir is the main grape variety on the slopes of Montagne de Rez and is a speciality of the warmer Côte des Bars vineyards. Pinot Meunier is rarely grown outside of Champagne and is extremely valuable to Champagne blends. It is characterized by lovely aromatics and light-bodied fruitiness. This robust grape shows better resistance to the cold and grows well in the more infertile soils of the Vallée de la Marne. Chardonnay is king on the Côte des Blancs, yielding delicately fragrant wines with floral and citrus notes. The Côte de Sézanne is planted almost exclusively with Chardonnay due to the slightly warmer temperatures, which allow the grapes to ripen better and produce wines with a biscuity flavor. By now you should have a good feeling for the region of Champagne. In the rest of the course, we're going to focus on how Champagne is made in these various areas and the types and styles of wines you will find. Many wines of the Old World, and especially those from France, classify and name their wines not from the grapes they are made of, but by the places they are from. In Champagne, with many large champagne houses such as Krug, Bollinger or Paul Roger maintaining a house style made from grapes from all over the region, a different system was needed. To learn more about how Champagne classifies its vineyards, in this lesson we'll take a look at the cru system, Grand Cru and Premier Cru villages, and Grand Cru and Premier Cru champagnes. Let's begin by explaining what the cru system is. The appellation of Champagne is made up of 320 villages. Each village has many vineyards that are planted around it. Every village is classified based on its quality using a percentile system known as the cru system, or échelle des crus. This literally translates to ladder of growth. The villages are rated on a scale of 1 to 100. The ranking is based on strict criteria such as soil, slope, and microclimate. This system was developed in 1927 as a way to set the price of grapes. The higher the percentage of a village, the more a producer will receive for their grapes. It's quite different to other classification systems in France. In Burgundy, for example, each vineyard is classified according to its quality and value. In Champagne, however, the entire village is classified. This means that every vineyard falling within a certain village is given the same classification. This generalization of vineyards has caused the cru system to lose favor among some of the Champenois. Some vineyards are clearly much better than others, and yet because they are in the same village, they have to share the same classification. It's a contentious point and has been the topic of much debate over recent years. Now that we understand the cru system, let's learn about Grand Cru and Premier Cru villages. Premier Cru villages are those with a rating of between 90 and 99%. And Grand Cru villages are those rare few with a rating of 100%. In all Champagne's 84,000 acres of vineyards, there are currently 44 Premier Cru villages and only 17 Grand Cru villages. All of the Grand Cru villages are located in the three best-known sub-regions. First is Montagne de Rez, which boasts 9 Grand Cru villages, more than any other sub-region. Grand Cru villages Bouzy and Sillery are found here and are best known for their Pinot Noir grapes. The second sub-region is Vallée de la Marne, whose frost-prone Grand Cru villages of Ailly and Tours-sur-Marne mostly grow the robust Pinot Meunier grapes. Côte des Blancs is the final sub-region and contains Grand Cru villages such as Cramont, Avize and Auger. As you'll remember from the last lesson, this entire sub-region is best known for its Chardonnay grapes. Finally, let's understand Grand Cru and Premier Cru champagnes. While the trend is slowly growing, there are very few champagnes made from grapes from a single vineyard. Instead, grapes come from multiple vineyards and villages and are made into wines and then blended. We will learn more about this process later. What's important to know now is that a bottle of champagne is almost always a blend of grapes from different vineyards. A typical blend is composed of grapes from up to 80 different vineyards. A Premier Cru champagne is made from grapes of one or more Premier Cru villages. Likewise, Grand Cru champagne is made from grapes of one or more Grand Cru villages. If a champagne is made from grapes only grown in Premier Cru villages, then that can be written on the label like this. The same goes for Grand Cru champagnes, like this one. All of the grapes for this wine have come from a Grand Cru village. The next part of our journey into Champagne is to find out how these sparkling wines are made. So in this lesson, we will learn about base wines and the Champagne method. Remember how we learnt about the history of Champagne and how bubbles kept driving the winemakers like Dom Pérignon mad? Well, today making Champagne is all about purposefully creating these bubbles. As wonderful as the vine is, it does not make bubbly grapes. So to start making Champagne, you have to start by making a still wine. This is known as a base wine. A base wine is made from grapes grown in Champagne. They are almost always either Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, or Chardonnay. When they arrive in the cellar at harvest, they're pressed gently so the juice is clear. If a winemaker is making a rosé Champagne, he will let the red grape skins remain in contact with the juice for a short time to give the wine a pink color. After the juice has been pressed and moved to a tank, it ferments just like a still wine. Different varieties from different vineyards are fermented separately. Once these wines have finished fermenting, you have what is known as the base wine or vin clair. These are highly acidic, young wines and taste quite different from finished champagnes. It is here that champagne makers turn into artists. They must blend many different base wines together into what is known as the cuvée. The champagne maker must see into the future and imagine what this blend of acidic and difficult wines will taste like years in the future. With the cuvée blended, the winemaker is ready to produce the exhilarating fizz champagne is known for. To understand how these bubbles are created, we're going to learn about the Champagne method. The Champagne method is how champagne producers get bubbles in their wines. Let's take a closer look at the Champagne method by breaking it into 7 steps. Step 1. Bottling. The cuvée is bottled and sealed with a crown cap, just like you find on a beer bottle. As it is bottled, a mixture called the liqueur de tirage is added. This mixture contains yeasts and sugar that will create the next fermentation. The amount of sugar added is very important, as it determines the amount of gas that will be created. Step 2. Fermentation. The bottles are stored in a cellar for the second fermentation. The yeasts consume the sugar, releasing alcohol and carbon dioxide. Because of the strong crown cap, the carbon dioxide cannot escape and is dissolved in the wine. Once all the sugar is consumed, the yeasts have nothing left to eat and die. All of these dead yeast cells create the lees. It is this lees that gives champagne its delicious bready aroma and flavor. Step 3. Aging on the lees. During this step, the wine is left to age on the lees, and the process of autolysis occurs. Autolysis is the releasing of complex flavor compounds and aromas into the wine from the dead yeast cells. This gives champagne a wonderful rich palate of nuts, brioche, and biscuit. Depending on the type and style of champagne, the length of time the wine spends on the lees will vary from 15 months to over 3 years. While the lees are great for adding flavor, nobody wants it in their finished wine. So after aging, the lees must be removed. This brings us to step 4, riddling. Riddling is the first step in getting rid of the lees. Traditionally, champagne bottles are placed in riddling racks like these that hold the bottles upside down at a 45-degree angle. Over time, the angle is increased and the bottles are slowly turned. This movement allows all the lees to settle at the top of the bottle. Modern riddling is automated and performed by a machine called a gyro pallet that can process 500 bottles at a time. Step 5. Disgorgement. In this step, the lees that has settled at the top of the bottle is taken out of the wine. In the early days, the cap would be popped off and the pressure from the fizz would shoot out the lees. The modern method involves first freezing the very top of the bottle before the cap is popped off and the frozen lees flies out. Step 6. Dosage. However a bottle is disgorged, a little wine is always lost and needs to be replaced. This is known as dosage. A mixture of wine and sugar is added to the bottle to top it up. This mixture is known as the liqueur d'expédition and determines how sweet or dry the final wine is. Step 7. Corking. The final step in making champagne is to seal the bottle with a cork. Because of all the pressure pushing on the cork, a wire cage or muselet is placed and tightened over it to make sure it doesn't pop out. Now the champagne is ready. Or is it? Champagne can age just as well as many white wines, and depending on the producer, can last for up to 10 years or more. With so many unique micro-terroirs, vineyards and producers, it's not surprising that champagne is a wine rich in different styles and types. To help make this easier to understand, champagne is categorized according to its vintage, grape variety, color, producer, as well as its level of sweetness. This lesson will help you to understand this better by exploring champagne vintages, types of champagne, styles of champagne, and single vineyard champagnes. We'll begin by learning about champagne vintages. The most common champagne produced is non-vintage champagne. These are blended wines made in different vintages. Most of the base wine will be made up of a single vintage, with producers then blending cuvées from various older vintages to make sure that the wine is always consistent. A champagne house's reputation rests in the quality of their non-vintage wine, so it is important their flavor profiles are kept similar each year. Vintage champagne is made exclusively from grapes of a single good quality year. It's capable of aging for much longer than non-vintage champagne and is typically fuller, deeper flavored, and of superior quality to non-vintage champagne. This means that vintage champagnes will demand a higher price than the non-vintage champagnes. No matter the style or type, every champagne is either vintage or non-vintage. Next, let's consider different types of champagne. The Prestige Cuvée, Cuvée de Luxe or Tête de Cuvée, is the premium champagne made by a champagne house. It's always very expensive and made from the best grapes in the best vineyards, and only in the best vintages. Some of the best examples include Louis Roederer's Cristal, Moet et Chandon's Dom Pérignon, and Paul Roger's Cuvée Sir Winston Churchill. A Blanc de Blanc, or White of White, is a champagne made exclusively from Chardonnay grapes. These wines are usually fresh and bright when young, but can possess great aging potential. Blanc de Blanc develop a wonderful depth and toasty richness with age, and many prestige cuvées come in this style. A Blanc de Noir, meaning white of blacks, is a white champagne made exclusively from Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier grapes, and is a speciality of the Côte des Bars or Aube. This less common style is slightly yellower in color and usually has more aromas of strawberries and other red fruits. The last type is rosé champagne. These wines are variable in both color and quality, but are generally fruity and slightly sweet. The wine gets its pink color in one of two ways. The clear juice of black grapes is either left to macerate for a short time on its skins, or more commonly, a small amount of red wine is added during blending. These champagnes are generally meant to be drunk young. Next, let's look at different styles of champagne. Styles of champagne are expressed in terms of dosage levels. Can you remember what the dosage is? That's right, it's when a bottle of champagne is topped up with a sweet wine before being bottled. This is when the sweetness level of a champagne is decided. The less sweet the dosage, the drier the champagne. From driest to sweetest, the styles are as follows: Brut Nature, Ultra Brut, or Extra Brut all refer to dosages with a residual sugar level of 0 to 6 grams per litre and are bone dry. These champagnes can be a little austere for some palates, but their following is growing. Brut champagne has a residual sugar level of between 6 and 15 grams per litre and is the most common style. Slightly less dry, extra sec champagne, meaning extra dry, contains 12 to 20 grams of sugar per litre. Sec or dry champagne has a residual sugar level of between 17 and 35 grams per litre. Despite its name, you can taste the sweetness quite easily in this style. These champagnes are great to serve with desserts. On the sweeter side, demi-sec champagne contains residual sugar levels of between 33 and 50 grams per litre. The sweetest champagne is doux and contains over 50 grams of sugar per litre, though very few are produced today. In the same way that champagne is either vintage or non-vintage, every bottle of champagne falls into one of the styles above. Finally, let's find out about single vineyard champagnes. Most champagne is made by blending together grapes from different vineyards, but in recent times both the big houses and the smaller grower champagne makers have been producing more wines whose grapes come from a single site. The most famous are Krug's Clos de Ménil and Clos d'Ambonnay, the latter of which commands the highest price for a champagne that is regularly made. These are wines from particular vineyards and try to express the terroir of those vineyards. More single vineyard champagnes are coming onto the market all the time as winemakers learn more about individual vineyards they use. One of the wonderful aspects about champagne is the diversity of styles, types and brands that come from such a small corner of the world. Wine labels are often taken for granted. By now you know that only true champagne is permitted to have the word champagne on the label. But a champagne label tells you far more about the wine than you might think. In this lesson, we'll focus on the mandatory information and the optional information. Let's start by looking at the mandatory information. These are the details that you'll find on any bottle of champagne. The most important piece of information on the champagne bottle is the Appellation d'origine contrôlée, AOC. All true champagne must have the words Champagne, and France, prominently displayed on the label. The brand name will also be clearly visible on the label. Here you can see the brand is Paul Roger. Another detail that will always be on the label is the champagne style. As we've learnt, this refers to the sweetness of the wine. Here you can see the style of champagne is brut, meaning the residual sugar in the wine is between 6 and 15 grams per litre. The producer must also be specified on the label. This is done by means of a 2-letter code and a trade registration number. The 2-letter code indicates the type of producer. There are 7 different types of champagne producer. Producers can either be growers, champagne houses, cooperatives, merchants, or private clients. It is the relationship between them that determines which type they fall under. When a grower uses his own grapes and produces champagne from it, that grower falls under récoltant manipulant. This type of producer is identified by the letters RM on the label. This champagne is known as grower champagne and is becoming increasingly popular due to the artisanal reflection of its micro-terroir. Sometimes a group of growers come together as a registered wine organization or cooperative and will combine their resources and vineyards to produce wine under one label. These producers are specified on the label by the letters CM, which stand for Coopérative de Manipulation. Some growers give their grapes to a cooperative but buy the wine back at a later stage of production to sell under their own label. These producers are referred to as récoltants coopérateurs and are represented by the letters RC on the champagne label. Sometimes 2 or more growers share a winery where they will produce champagne. Each grower will keep their grapes separate and will sell their wine under their own label. These producers fall under Société de Récoltants, or SR, as it is displayed on the champagne label. Champagne houses who buy grapes and base wines from growers and use it to produce champagne under their own brand fall under Négociant Manipulant. As you can see here, this is NM. When a merchant or distributor buys finished champagne that they didn't grow or produce, they will fall under Négociant Distributeur, or ND, as it is displayed on the champagne label. When a private client, such as a restaurant, hotel, or supermarket, buys finished champagne and sells it under a private label, they fall under the category of Marque d'Acheteur, or MA, as it is on the champagne label. Another detail that must be included on the label is the location of the producer. The town where the wine was made, as well as the country of origin, must appear. Here you can see that the champagne was made in Épernay, France. The alcohol content must also be displayed on the label and varies between 10.5% and 13%. The Paul Roger Sir Winston Churchill, as you can see, has an alcohol content of 12.5%. Finally, the capacity of the bottle must be indicated, either in milliliters or centiliters. A standard champagne bottle is 75 centiliters. Now let's consider the optional information that producers can choose to put on their labels or not. If the wine is made exclusively from the grapes of one vintage, the year can be indicated. You can see that this bottle of champagne was a 2002 vintage. If the champagne is made solely from Grand Cru or Premier Cru grapes, this will usually be highlighted on the label. Most prestige cuvées give the name of the blend, in this case Sir Winston Churchill. The wine type will generally be specified, for example Rosé, Blanc de Blanc, or Blanc de Noir, though most champagnes are a blend. Sometimes the date of disgorgement will be on the back label. So far in the course, you've learnt a lot about champagne in general. Now it's time to get a little more particular. In this lesson, we're going to learn about some of the major champagne houses. These are large producers who've been making champagne for a very long time. We'll find out a little about them, where they are located, the style of champagne they are best known for, and if they have any prestige cuvées. In this lesson, we're going to focus on Bollinger, Pol Roger, Krug, Taittinger, Veuve Clicquot, and Moet et Chandon. Let's start with Bollinger. Bollinger was founded in 1829 in Ailly, where it remains till today. In 1885, it became the official supplier to the British court, and has remained popular in England ever since, where it is affectionately called Bolly. Bollinger's standard non-vintage champagne is a blend of 60% Pinot Noir, 25% Chardonnay, and 15% Pinot Meunier. Its base wines are fermented in oak barrels that give structure to the final wine, and make Bollinger champagne excellent for aging. Bollinger's prestige cuvée is the Vieille Vigne Française. It is a vintage Blanc de Noir champagne made from the grapes of only 2 small vineyards. Next, let's learn about Pol Roger. Pol Roger is located in Épernay and was founded in 1849. Today they are the official providers of champagne to the British royal family. Pol Roger owns 70 hectares in both the Côte de Blanc and Vallée de la Marne. Their non-vintage champagne is extremely classic, clean, floral, elegant, and with a delicious biscuity flavour. Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain during the Second World War, was a huge fan of Pol Roger, and apparently said of their wines, "In victory deserve it, in defeat need it." Pol Roger named their prestige cuvée after him, Cuvée Sir Winston Churchill. Its blend is a secret, but it is dominated by Pinot Noir. It is a vintage champagne, and only made when the grapes are of the highest quality. Next, let's find out about Krug. The Krug Champagne House was founded in 1843 and is based in Rez. Krug is known for making bold and rich champagnes, and its non-vintage consistently voted one of the world's finest champagnes. Its non-vintage champagne is called the Krug Grande Cuvée and is a blend of 120 wines made of either Pinot Noir, Chardonnay and Pinot Meunier from 10 or more different vintages. The bottle ages on the lees for 6 years before being disgorged. The wine is known for its nose of almonds and toasted pastries and a palate of fresh citrus fruit. Rather than a typical prestige cuvée, Krug produces 2 single vineyard vintage champagnes, the Krug Clos du Mesnil and Krug Clos d'Ambonnay. These wines are both only released after having been aged in Krug's cellars for at least 10 years. Now we're going to learn more about Taittinger. Taittinger is also situated in Rez and was founded in 1734. Taittinger is one of only 5 champagne houses to cellar its wines in the famous Gruyère of Rez, chalk caves originally dug out by the Romans. The house's non-vintage is known for the dominance of Chardonnay in its blend. It's generally fresh with flavors of citrus and toast. It is a great wine to have before a meal. Tattinger's prestige cuvée is the Comte de Champagne. It is a Blanc de Blanc vintage champagne from Grand Cru Vineyards. As it is aged in oak, it is quite toasty, rich, and always complex. Next, let's learn about Veuve Clicquot. Veuve Clicquot is one of the bigger houses in Champagne. The house is based in Rez and was founded in 1772. It's said to have been the first house to produce a rosé champagne. It's best known for understanding the process of getting the lees out of the bottle, revolutionizing champagne making. The non-vintage yellow label is mainly Pinot Noir with Chardonnay and Pinot Meunier. It's known for its flavors of honey, blackberry, and smoky finish. Veuve Clicquot's prestige cuvée is the La Grande Dame. It is a vintage champagne that is known to last for 10 to 15 years in the cellar. Finally, let's find out about Moët et Chandon. Moët et Chandon is one of the biggest producers of champagne. Annually, it creates around 26 million bottles of champagne. It was founded in 1743 in Épernay, where it still has its headquarters. The standard Moët et Chandon non-vintage is a blend of mainly Pinot Noir, and then Pinot Meunier and Chardonnay. It is a rich, classically styled champagne. The house is also very well known for its prestige cuvée, the vintage Dom Pérignon champagne, named after the monk we learnt about in our first lesson. It is a blend of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.